Today, we're feeling very punk and want to talk about the well-known band, the Sex Pistols. Specifically, their bass player, John Simon, AKA Sid Vicious, and the mystery surrounding the death of his girlfriend, Nancy Spungen. On May 10th, 1957, in the UK, Anne and John Ritchie welcomed a baby boy they named John Simon. This was the only child Anne ever had. The couple split up very early on when John Sr. abandoned Anne by encouraging her and John Simon to move to Ibiza with the promise of meeting them there, but never showing up. He had promised to send money to help take care of the two of them, but this never happened either. Anne and John Simon moved around constantly, trying to find work and enough money to get them through. Eventually, Anne had the funds to get the two of them back to England after finding work as a dealer of. As soon as Anne and John were back in the UK, they settled in North London. Anne ended up meeting a man named Christopher Beverley, and the two got married. John Simon and Christopher were very close, but sadly, 6 months after the wedding, Christopher passed away due to kidney failure. This was the real turning point for Anne. Things had not been easy for her or John Simon, and after losing her new husband, she could not keep holding it together, and the grief really sunk in. That was when her drug addiction began. Everything from opiates to. Because of this, Anne's relationship with John was incredibly tumultuous, and their family time was practically non-existent. John Simon spent a lot of time lashing out and trying to get attention, probably because he was receiving nothing from his mother. She didn't even know the name of the school he attended. That's how bad things were. Luckily, John Simon was able to find friends at a new school he started going to. He was a shy, reserved, kind of wimpy kid, but opened up about his troubled life and feelings of wanting to take his own life. He found a group of friends who all bonded over the difficult things they'd gone through, which brought him solace. These friends were John Lydon, John Gray, and John Wardle. When John Simon was just 16, Anne kicked him out of the house and onto the street. All four Johns decided to drop out of school and began squatting in abandoned buildings. They even changed their names to help out with the four John problem. John Lydon became Johnny Rotten, John Wardle became Jaw Wobble, John Gray kept his name, and John Simon, although not someone you'd describe as vicious, became Sid Vicious, inspired by a pet hamster that bit him. Even though Sid Vicious was actually a really shy guy, he took up a major interest in fashion, inspired by the glam rockers of the time like David Bowie. He started spiking his hair and wore leather jackets with studs. Johnny Rotten later said, "It would be mid-winter and bitter cold outside. He wouldn't wear a jacket because he would buy this new shirt or something. He had to be seen in this shirt." Sid and his friend group hung around King's Road in Chelsea, London, where experimental music and fashion were all the rage. The group was on their own. They woke up whenever they wanted, drank all the time, and didn't have jobs, but would busk on the street if they needed cash. Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious would play covers of Alice Cooper songs, and people actually gave them money to stop. In 1975, Johnny Rotten joined the newly formed band, the Sex Pistols, with 3 other bandmates, Glenn Matlock, Paul Cook, and Steve Jones. Sid was around the band all the time and was a major fan, even being photographed at their infamous show in 1976 where the band attacked the audience. Sid took inspiration from the band and decided to form his own band called the Flowers of Romance. The band never performed live and never recorded any of their own songs, but this didn't stop Sid from becoming a prevalent figure in the punk scene. He wrote songs that other bands would eventually use and even learned how to play bass during this time. However, his skill is widely debated. At a 1976 Sex Pistols show at the 100 Club, Sid was there, and some dude from a band that played earlier in the night was standing in front of him, blocking his view of the stage. Sid was so irritated by this, he took out a freaking chain and bashed it into this person's head. Though no charges were pressed, the incident was reported, and come to find out, Sid was on that night. Because of this incident and Sid's rebellious, violent nature, A band called The Damned took an interest in him. They asked Sid and another man, Dave Vanian, to audition to become their lead vocalist. Sid, however, never showed up. He swore up and down that Dave and some of his friends purposely gave him incorrect info about the date and time of the audition to screw him over. This enraged Sid, and he wanted revenge. A few months after the chain incident, Sid was invited to play drums for a band called Susie and the Banshees at a 2-day punk rock festival. On the second day at the festival, The Damned were playing, and guess who was leading vocals? Dave Vanian. Sid was drunk and high and thought this was a great time to release his anger. He took a glass and threw it towards Dave, but it backfired and ended up smashing into a pillar, blinding a woman standing next to it. Who was the woman? The girlfriend of one of the band members. After this incident, Sid Vicious was arrested and put in jail. In February of the following year, the Sex Pistols lost Glenn Matlock. They claimed to have kicked Glenn out because he liked the Beatles' music, which is apparently the worst thing you can say in a punk band. However, Glenn Matlock claims it was because he was tired of the BS. Apparently, the band manager liked to cause drama between the members in a way to curate their badass punk image. This ultimately didn't do anyone any favors, and Glenn left. This left an opening for none other than Sid Vicious, the band's biggest and rowdiest fan. Sid was encouraged by pretty much everyone around and in the band to act like a complete menace, getting as drunk and high as he wanted, creating the pogo dance where he would jump straight up and down, probably as a way to get a better view of the stage. We all know why. Sid believed that since the band was known as punk, that it meant he needed to be as chaotic and disruptive as possible, as a way to keep up their image. He joined the band to replace Glenn as their new bass player, despite not being very good at playing the instrument. In March of 1977, the Sex Pistols were signed by A&M Records. Their celebration included completely trashing the A&M office. Afterward, they went out to a restaurant/club, and of course, a fight broke out among the members and multiple people there. Sid jammed a broken bottle into the face of an audio engineer, and the next day, the record company dropped them, and the radio stations refused to play their music. So much for the celebration, huh? But just because Sid was in the band didn't mean that he was going to rehearsals or being a very good bandmate. At this point, Sid was just getting deeper and deeper into his drug use, even having his mom as a supplier of. At one point, Sid was in the hospital with hepatitis due to his substance use. Things were not looking good. However, the year that the band was signed was the same year Sid met a girl named Nancy Spungen. Nancy was an American living in the UK. She was born on February 27, 1958, to Deborah and Frank Spungen. Nancy almost didn't survive her birth due to a lack of oxygen because the umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck. Throughout her early years, Nancy had various medical issues and had difficulty trusting her surroundings. When she was still a baby, pediatric doctors prescribed her liquid barbiturate in an attempt to get Nancy to sleep. Every few hours, her parents would drop the medication on her tongue, which is most commonly known to treat seizures. Nancy did not experience seizures. Nancy was a very intelligent child, but had many behavioral issues and would lash out against her younger sister and psychiatrist. At the age of 3, she began having hallucinations, which became way more intense with age. She was violent towards others and sadly was violent towards herself. When Nancy was in high school, her parents enrolled her in Devereaux Manor in Pennsylvania. She ended up running away and attempted to take her own life by taking scissors to her wrist. At age 15, Nancy was diagnosed with schizophrenia. At 16, Nancy started attending the University of Colorado Boulder, but after just a few months of being there, she was arrested for buying and was later expelled. At 17, Nancy decided she would leave for New York City to become a sex worker, doing occasional shifts at clothing stores or music journalism. She followed rock bands like Aerosmith and the Ramones and was very into the punk rock scene, including the drugs and disorder that came with it. In 1977, she flew to London where she met the Sex Pistols. Originally, Nancy had her eyes set on Johnny Rotten, but once Sid saw her, it was a done deal. The two were one and the same. When Sid got into fights, Nancy would join. If Sid was using substances, Nancy would too. After a while, Sid was completely bent to Nancy, and vice versa. It was difficult for anyone to get the two away from each other, but that didn't mean things were in a good place. At the same time, Nancy and Sid perfectly encapsulated the punk scene, and their constant fighting was well known and even encouraged in the scene. Photographers and journalists were drawn to the couple purely based on their vibe. The two were violent, destructive, and abusive towards each other. Nancy would often hit Sid before he went on stage, and the two would physically assault each other when they were under the influence. Other band members were witnesses to Sid beating Nancy, but she denied that it was his fault. The Sex Pistols were booked for a short American tour, and the band was adamant that Nancy could not join them. No one liked her, earning the nickname Nauseating Nancy because of her constant outbursts. But that didn't mean Sid was any better. The band hated what Sid had become, and Nancy only made it worse. Throughout the tour, Sid was going through withdrawals and was totally miserable. Their manager only paid him $14 a week, hoping that the lack of funds would stop his substance abuse. At one point, Sid carved "Give me a fix" into his chest before a show, hoping that someone would give him drugs afterwards. And they did. He continued his IDGAF attitude and violent streak at shows, attacking audience members for any reason he felt fit. At one show, he thought someone was making fun of his playing and struck him directly in the head with the bass guitar. Everything was always at a 10 with this dude. After this train wreck of a tour, the band was done. Johnny Rotten was fed up and they called it quits. Just days after the end of the tour, Sid boarded a plane to New York where he fell into a substance and alcohol-induced coma. The doctors told him that if he continued his reckless drinking and substance abuse, he would be dead within 6 months. Sadly, this didn't stop Sid, and he continued to spiral downwards. Once he left the hospital, he met back up with Nancy, the picture of a healthy relationship, and the two traveled to Paris. They spent most of their time in hotel rooms using substances. After some time, they had no money and needed a way to make it. It's rumored that Nancy returned to sex work, and Sid encouraged it. After gaining some cash, they traveled to a few destinations, and Nancy served as a temporary manager for Sid. She tried to book him gigs, even going as far as to start up a new band, which was called Vicious White Kids. The band only had one live performance where Nancy assisted with backup vocals, but her mic was unplugged for the set. Eventually, Sid and Nancy left for New York and stayed at Hotel Chelsea. They moved rooms as they set their first one on fire. Imagine being a housekeeper at one of these places and Sid and Nancy are in the room you're assigned to. I would quit. Too much work. Too stressful. The thing is, having a well-known punk rocker like Sid Vicious was bound to get you some cash. These shows were big and drew a crowd. However, some audiences booed Sid because he made a poor attempt at trying to recreate Johnny's sound. Of course, this pissed him off, and he would retaliate and insult the crowds. While the pair had some money, they used it all on substances and alcohol. Nancy ended up calling her parents to ask for financial help. While on the phone with her mother, Nancy admitted that the relationship was toxic and abusive. She had developed kidney problems and wanted to get Sid on a detox program. A lot was finally bubbling to the surface. In a later interview with Nancy's mother, she admitted that she knew it would be the last time she talked to her. She explained that it was the first conversation the two had in years where her daughter was totally clear and listened to her. You know when you just have a gut feeling that something isn't right? I can't imagine having that feeling with your own daughter, but a mother's intuition is rarely wrong. On October 11th of 1978, the couple was hosting a party in their hotel room. They had an open door policy with all of their friends, which meant anyone could come or go as they pleased. Of course, there were copious amounts of substances and alcohol, and Sid slipped into an unconscious state after consuming about 30 plus pills. The people at the party said that it looked like Sid wanted to take his life. At around 2:30 4:30 in the morning, Sid was still out cold, and Nancy asked a dealer friend to get her some painkillers. At 5 o'clock, the last of their friends had left the room. 2 hours later, people from the rooms next door reported hearing loud moans coming from a female. Shortly after, Sid awoke from his coma and called down to the front desk. Nancy had been stabbed. She was lifeless. When paramedics rushed to the scene, Nancy was underneath the bathroom sink with a single puncture wound to her abdomen. Immediately, Sid Vicious was arrested for second-degree murder, under the assumption that he was the one who had killed Nancy, which seems to make the most sense as it was just her and him in the hotel room. When questioned by the police, Sid flip-flopped multiple times on his story. At first, he admitted to doing it, then said he couldn't remember what happened, and then admitted that he didn't mean to kill her. It gets a little tricky when you remember that Sid had taken 30+ pills, and at that point, he should not have even been alive. It's difficult to say what he would have even remembered being in a state like that. There are a couple of possibilities we could look at. One, Sid and Nancy had an incredibly toxic, abusive, and violent relationship. Sid was also known to be chaotic and reckless with his fans and random people who spoke to him wrong. Could Sid have woken up and gotten into an argument with Nancy? Maybe that was the final straw? Or maybe it was an accident, but he still thrust the knife. Two, there were a couple of drug dealers who had been in the hotel room that night. The couple kept money in their bedside table along with a blade. Maybe Nancy saw someone coming for their cash and they attacked her? I mean, an open door policy leads to a lot of unknown people coming in and out. And when everyone is high and drunk, who knows who could have been in that room that night? 3, Nancy could have harmed herself. Perhaps she made an end-it-all pact with Sid that night. I mean, he was seen taking all of those pills like he wanted to end his life. She could have seen him on the bed assuming he was dead, or maybe she jabbed herself during an argument to cause a scene. Many people believed that Sid was incapable of doing something like that to Nancy. He was pretty incoherent the night of the murder and needed help standing up and walking. Could someone like that really have stabbed Nancy? One possibility is the dealer that left to get substances for Nancy. After he returned from getting them, he saw that everyone had left the room. Sid was out cold on the bed, and assuming he was lifeless, the dealer took the money from the nightstand. Nancy came out of the bathroom, saw what he was doing, and started freaking out at him. The dealer took the blade that was sitting nearby and stabbed her, pushing her back into the bathroom to die. This dealer denies it was him, but conveniently blamed it on another dealer in the hotel lobby. We will never know for sure what happened that night. Sid was released on bail, covered by Virgin Records, and was completely miserable. In an interview, he was asked where he would like to be, and Sid responded with under the ground. He even tried to take his own life by slashing his wrists, explaining that he felt life was meaningless without her. His old manager, however, used all the publicity as a way to sell merch and promote an upcoming reunion with the Sex Pistols. After completing a rehab program, Sid and his mother went back to the Chelsea hotel and celebrated his release by doing $200 worth of. On top of that, Sid took 4 Quaaludes. After this, he never woke up. He was found with a note in his pocket stating, "We had a death pact, and I have to keep my end of the bargain." Well, everyone, that is the super sad story of Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. What did you all think of this one? It just shows that a rock and roll lifestyle isn't all it's chalked up to be. I wish things could have happened differently for both of them. What do you all think happened to Nancy? Well, thanks for watching Killer Bites. I'm Brandi. See you next time.